Good morning and welcome to IU Sports Sunday here on 98.7 The Zone. Nick Rodecap with you. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. We've got plenty to talk about here in the IU sports world and in the college sports world in general. Indiana's Pro Day was earlier this week. There's some news to catch up on in the transfer portal, both good and bad, as far as Indiana men's basketball and Indiana women's basketball are concerned. So happy to have you with us here on the first Sunday of April. And we will begin, of course, with Indiana football's Pro Day, highlighted by Fernando Mendoza working out with all 32 NFL teams in attendance. And it was a packed house inside the Mellencamp Pavilion, and it's funny because a lot of people just discovering for the first time how antiquated Mellencamp is. And for those of you who have been around the block a few times as far as IU football is concerned, you will know as well as anybody else how bad Mellencamp used to be. The buzzing lights overhead, the terrible turf, which was such a common fixture in Bloomington at Memorial Stadium and at the indoor facility, Mellencamp Pavilion as well. And thankfully, prior to this season, they finally replaced the turf and they got rid of those awful buzzing lights. And that was a welcome surprise going into the pavilion a couple months ago to talk to some of the IU softball players before their season got underway. It's actually better than it used to be, and Indiana's indoor facility is still not exactly up to snuff with others of Indiana's Power 4 status around the United States of America. But it didn't matter, because what matters is the product on the field. And let me tell you, Fernando Mendoza was slinging the rock, and a few other IU players also turning heads, notably D'Angelo Pons, who ran a pair of unofficial sub 4.3 second 40-yard dashes. And now Pons is likely to be taken in the first round of the upcoming NFL draft here in a couple weeks. But if there was ever any doubt to his status as a first-round selection, I believe that doubt has gone by the wayside. He had a phenomenal Pro Day, as of course did Fernando Mendoza. His 56th throw program, he featured 9 pass-catching targets. He ran the entire show himself. And, we've seen him in interviews throughout the last couple of months in the postseason kind of wind down or ramp up as it is for him as he prepares to likely be selected first overall by the Las Vegas Raiders here in a couple weeks with the NFL draft coming up. But Fernando, very jovial in his interviews, very easygoing, and he was all business. He was all business on IU's Pro Day earlier this week on April 1st, speaking to the media. He lightened things up a little bit, but when he was running the show, you could tell he was laser focused. He was locked in. He was ready to go. And that's the thing about Fernando that is so impressive, is that even as the outside noise continues to ramp up, continues to get more voluminous, louder, he just keeps things mellow. He keeps things the same. The process, he is so process oriented. You know it if you've spoken to him, if you've listened to him speak. He keeps his preparation the same, because if you go in feeling confident, feeling prepared, then you are more likely to succeed, and that success in turn breeds its own kind of confidence. And as he worked through his Pro Day program, the Indiana quarterback Fernando Mendoza, he looked great. And he was, I believe, officially 53 of 56. Now, there was one, I think it was a deep route to Elijah Surratt where he missed him by about a foot. There was one that was dropped by E.J. Williams. But, outside of that, Fernando was flawless, and I love the fact that this guy is such a team player. The Indiana quarterback, Fernando Mendoza, he won the Heisman Trophy. He was the face of the program as it went undefeated, won its first national championship, won the Big Ten title outright for the first time in a million years. All of these accolades heaped upon him individually, because the quarterback gets most of the credit and most of the blame. It goes both ways. But he does nothing but try to shine the spotlight on those around him. He had that great soundbite in the lead up to the Heisman Trophy ceremony about how the only reason that he's able to shine so bright is because he is surrounded by stars in each and every direction. And you could see him putting those stars on display on Pro Day. You look at the way he was featuring his running backs. For example, Roman Hemby catching passes, obviously Elijah Surratt, Omar Cooper, E.J. Williams, Jonathan Brady was in there as well, as was Holden Stays, and Riley Nowakowski was in there as well. And he made it his mission to make sure that all of the NFL scouts there knew not just what he was capable of doing, but I think more importantly for Fernando Mendoza It was to show what his teammates are capable of. And that's the kind of teammate that he is. He is humble. He lifts up those around him, both on and off the field. And I tell you what, there's been a lot made about his potential as an NFL prospect, about his potential as a franchise quarterback in Las Vegas with the Raiders. And regardless of his on-field performance, this is a guy who the Raiders are going to be happy to have around for years to come in the locker room, because he is such a leader. He is such a leader of men. He endears himself to those in the locker room, and it is a treat to watch. Now, as far as the Las Vegas Raiders are concerned, obviously we know that they are selecting first overall in the upcoming NFL draft here in just a couple of weeks, coming up in Pittsburgh. The Raiders just signed a 37-year-old Kirk Cousins to what is effectively a $20 million one-year guaranteed contract. And Cousins, he's 37 years old. He's pushing 40. Obviously, his time in Atlanta was a little bit tumultuous, but you could say that about the Falcons' existence as a franchise, if we're being honest. The Falcons are such an interestingly run organization. Now, we know that they recently fired head coach Raheem Morris and GM Terry Fontenot, and ultimately Kirk Cousins was cut by the Falcons. And I tell you what, Kirk Cousins, I mean, he's been a serviceable quarterback for a while. He's not going to blow your socks off. He might take you to the playoffs, but he's not going to lead you to a Super Bowl. The fact that his agent continues to net him all this guaranteed money, I mean, this guy makes so much money, and relative to his contemporaries, I mean, the likes of Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, you look at Lamar Jackson, there are so many other quarterbacks in the NFL who have been more successful than him, and yet he continues to seemingly out-earn almost everybody. And, I mean, hey, tip your cap to his agent, tip your cap to his interview skills, Kirk Cousins, because he is going to Las Vegas under the direction of head coach Clint Kubiak, who he worked with previously. Cousins signing with the Las Vegas Raiders as a free agent. Now, there are a couple different ways that you can look at this. You can look at this as either Clint Kubiak trying to set up Fernando Mendoza with a bit of a cushion of sorts, a bit of a fail-safe, okay, hey, if you are not ready to start week one, that is fine. We've got a proven veteran, a guy who can at least kind of hold down the fort until you're ready to go. Or you look at it as a little bit of competition. Either way, I think Fernando Mendoza welcomes the challenge and certainly welcomes the mentorship of a guy like Kirk Cousins, who has been around the block for a long time in the National Football League. Now, Clint Kubiak spoke to the media in a league meeting, and he said ideally he doesn't want to start Fernando Mendoza day one. You want to have him learn behind somebody, and it is his job as a coach to get Fernando Mendoza ready to go. And it seems to me that the most reasonable course of action here, I mean, look at what happened with the Colts and Anthony Richardson, the seesaw, the flip-flopping between, okay, he's our guy, he's not our guy, this guy's a raw prospect, but we're not giving him adequate opportunity to prepare and to learn and to be successful and be set up for success. Well, Clint Kubiak is saying, hey, Fernando, there's no pressure. We've got a veteran. He knows how to run my offense. He can help you through the growing pains that come with transitioning to the National Football League. And let's be honest, as far as Fernando Mendoza goes, his pro day was not something that he needed to do. This guy prepares like a maniac. You can ask Curt Cignetti. He has said as much himself. He prepares like nobody Cignetti has ever seen, and he has coached multiple all-conference caliber quarterbacks, including, of course, the likes of Curtis Rourke and one-time NFL quarterback Ben DiNucci. Cignetti knows a thing or two about successful quarterbacks. Even though Fernando Mendoza's got this great work ethic, he is probably going to struggle at times in the National Football League because everybody in the NFL was a dude in college. They were the guy on their team. That's why they are in the National Football League. So having a guy like Kirk Cousins mentoring Fernando Mendoza, I don't think IU fans should see it as, oh no, it's the end of the world. What if he's going to be a bust? And I don't think many people do see it that way. But I do think it's great that the Las Vegas Raiders have a plan because, I mean, let's be honest. Everybody who selects at the top of the National Football League draft is there because they are bad. As a team, they had a poor previous season, and that is why they are selecting at the top of the draft. The Las Vegas Raiders did not have a good season. Their quarterback last year was Geno Smith. Sure, they had some good young pieces with the likes of Ashton Jeanty at running back and Brock Bowers at tight end, but their offensive line was terrible. Well, what have the Raiders done this offseason? They brought in a center in Tyler Linderbaum from the Baltimore Ravens. Did they overpay for Linderbaum? Maybe a little bit, but Linderbaum is a proven piece the centerpiece of an offensive line in Baltimore. He goes over to Las Vegas, and they kept Max Crosby, I think sort of by accident, did the Las Vegas Raiders. But on the defensive end, Max Crosby is as good as it gets at the edge rusher position. And all this is to say, the Las Vegas Raiders did not just stumble backwards into the number 1 overall pick with no plan. Not just saying, okay, well, we're going to draft this Mendoza kid, and if he fixes our franchise, great. And if not, we'll kick him to the curb, just like it seems like the Colts are going to do with Anthony Richardson because they didn't have a plan for him. As far as Mendoza goes in Vegas, he's going to have a veteran mentor. He's going to have a solid offensive line. He's got good players at the running back and tight end positions. Now, I don't know about the Raiders' receiving core. It seems kind of iffy, but Fernando Mendoza has a solid head coach in Clint Kubiak. He's got a good system around him, and his pro day showed he doesn't just care about himself. He cares about lifting up all his guys around him, which we already knew. He's got a great work ethic. It seems like he's acing every interview. And I am really excited to see what Fernando Mendoza can do with the Las Vegas Raiders. Even if he doesn't start in week 1, I think that's okay. I think that is okay. IU fans will be okay because ultimately they want to see him succeed in the long term. And I know from speaking with Fernando Mendoza, from being in those interview scrums with him, he is so selfless. He does not care what it takes for the team to win. He's going to do it. And if that means sitting behind Kirk Cousins for a little bit while he ensures that he can run the offense to the best of his ability, I know that he's going to be more than okay with that, with Fernando Mendoza going to the Las Vegas Raiders, presumably in the first round, pick number 1 overall in the NFL draft here in a couple weeks. And tell you what, if you would have told somebody at this time 2 years ago, yeah, you know, this Curt Cignetti guy, he's going to coach the number 1 overall pick in the 2026 NFL draft. He's going to win the Heisman Trophy as Fernando Mendoza. They're going to win a national championship. Nobody would have believed you. Absolutely nobody would have believed you. But that is the reality that we live in. And we talked about this a little bit on the show last week as far as Fernando Mendoza is concerned. His projection, perhaps as a number 1 overall pick. Is this a weak quarterback class? What does his long-term NFL career outlook entail? I think as far as Mendoza goes, and this has kind of been established, that he is a high floor, lower ceiling kind of guy. And you don't want to put too much stock in a quarterback's performance on a pro day because, I mean, look, I am Fernando Mendoza's biggest advocate, but as does every quarterback in a pro day setting, he's not facing a defense. He's throwing against the air. He's throwing in a controlled environment. But, I mean, the danger of putting too much stock in pro days is you get people who get, you know, they drool over throws made by guys like Zach Wilson on the run, facing nothing but air, of course. And, wow, Zach Wilson's going to be really good. Look at this throw he made at BYU's pro day in spring of 2021. He's going to be fantastic. And as it turns out, well, no. But I think Clint Kubiak and the Raiders have a very solid vision for Fernando Mendoza, saying, hey, let's have him learn behind somebody. I mean, we've seen that work in the past where a quarterback is really highly touted coming out of college, sits behind a veteran for a little bit, and then gets his start in a lower pressure situation and ultimately takes over as the face of the franchise. The comparison that I think you can draw on here as far as Fernando Mendoza, Kirk Cousins, and the Raiders are concerned is Patrick Mahomes with Alex Smith and Andy Reid in Kansas City back in 2017. Patrick Mahomes, highly touted prospect coming out of Texas Tech. He was kind of a high-risk, high-reward prospect because some of the numbers that he put up were just unbelievable. But the question was, would he ultimately kind of tone himself down and mold himself into a franchise caliber quarterback? Well, he sat behind Alex Smith for a little bit in his first season in Kansas City, and then ultimately took the reins in the latter half of the season, and well, the rest is history. The guy's going to go down as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. I don't know if Fernando Mendoza has a Patrick Mahomes ceiling. I certainly think he has the work ethic to get himself as close to that ceiling as possible. But I think that this could be a very similar situation in Las Vegas with Kirk Cousins and Fernando Mendoza and the Raiders. So exciting to see NFL Network in Bloomington for Indiana's Pro Day. I mean, I don't know how many times in the past you could ever even have considered the fact that NFL Network would be broadcasting live from Mellencamp Pavilion on the campus of Indiana University. It's special. The center of the college football universe right now runs through Bloomington, Indiana. And if anybody wants to try to tell you otherwise, just point to the national championship trophy that's currently sitting in the case at the Rock on the northwest side of IU's campus. And on the topic of the center of the college football universe being in Bloomington, I think that we are going to see Indiana football with some new uniforms next season, because what Curt Cignetti has done through his first two spring sessions in Bloomington, if you will, the first two bouts of spring ball that we've seen during his tenure, is the team has practiced in the previous era's uniforms. And what I mean by that is you've seen in the past couple of years, he used the uniforms that were worn in the final years of the Tom Allen era in Indiana's spring ball sessions. And what are they wearing this year? They're wearing last year's game uniforms. The quarterbacks are still wearing the black jerseys, of course. That's to differentiate themselves, and that's because, thankfully, Cignetti did not go to Adidas and say, hey, I want those black jerseys that Indiana wore in the 4-overtime game against Akron back in 2023, because we need to leave everything associated with that Akron game in the past. But what Cignetti has done is, I guess, kind of hinted at it. You're going to see, hey, maybe Indiana's coming out with some new uniforms. Now, will Adidas make them available for purchase? If history is any indication, no, because Adidas doesn't make any competent decisions when it comes to selling uniforms. You cannot buy a replica Fernando Mendoza jersey from Adidas. It is a joke. It is a travesty. Indiana never should have re-upped that contract with Adidas. I know they re-signed it a few years back. That is one of the biggest travesties of our modern time. But hopefully Adidas doesn't screw up the redesign, because I know people are clamoring for the block eye helmets to come back, clamoring for some sort of complexity, some sort of flash in the design, and I'm going to look to those people and I'm going to say, hey, as far as Indiana football's uniforms are concerned, Curt Cignetti is probably the last guy who wants any sort of flash, any sort of pizzazz, any sort of sparkle on these uniforms. He's going to keep them simple because he doesn't care about flash. He doesn't care about showmanship. Look at how he handled Nick Marsh wearing gold cleats on the first day of practice. He ripped him a new one, and let's just say Nick Marsh isn't wearing gold cleats anymore. The Michigan State transfer wide receiver, one of the most highly touted prospects, he's not above anybody else. And so I think with the new jerseys for Indiana football, which were also hinted at on an Instagram live stream by Daniel Ndukwe, an edge rusher who, of course, emerged in the latter stages of the season with injuries to guys like Kellen Wyatt and to Stephen Daly as well. Daniel Ndukwe was on Instagram Live, and he seemed to hint at the fact that Indiana football is probably getting new jerseys. It's going to be a very exciting time for Indiana football. I mean, you look at the ticket prices, they just keep going up. Josh Hoover taking over for Fernando Mendoza. But Mendoza had a phenomenal pro day. Indiana's wide receivers had a great pro day alongside Mendoza, and that was the whole goal. And that is why Fernando Mendoza is the ultimate team player. I thought E.J. Williams had a really good pro day. Aside from that one drop that he had, I think one of the best throws that Mendoza made was the deep ball down the right hash, 65 yards in the air, and he dropped it right in the breadbasket for E.J. Williams, who ran a perfect route. Obviously, the routes are going to be good. The throws are going to be good because these guys aren't facing pressure. But I do think it is very impressive that Fernando Mendoza was able to show off Indiana's wide receiving core, the tight ends, the running backs as well in his pro day. With all 32 NFL teams in attendance, that probably got a lot of guys paid life-changing money. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on 98.7 The Zone. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rottercap here with you on 98.7 The Zone. Indiana men's basketball in the offseason, obviously not in the Final Four, nowhere near the Final Four, and it's a shame that the closest Indiana men's basketball has come to the Final Four in the last 10 years is its geographic location in relation to Bloomington. It's in the Circle City this weekend, and IU basketball now fully entrenched in the offseason. I did think, though, that it was funny. Eddie White was pictured with Darren DeVries outside a restaurant in downtown Indy, and I'm hoping that Darren DeVries has some sort of plan to get Indiana back to the Final Four one day, because they haven't been there since 2002, and that is well before I, Nick Rottercap, was living on the planet Earth. And that is such a really weird thing to think about. Last time Indiana was in the Final Four, there were very few, if any, undergraduate students who were even alive. But Indiana handling things as far as departures go. And one thing that we do know, and this one really surprised me, as far as IU basketball, the roster turnover, Trent Sisley is coming back next year. I did not expect that, but there was a report that emerged earlier this week from On3 that said Sisley is returning for his sophomore season in Bloomington. Sisley, of course, the native of Santa Claus, Indiana, who played his time in high school at Montverde Academy, and I don't really know, I guess, what Darren DeVries said to get Sisley to come back. But I'm glad that he was able to keep Sisley here in Bloomington. Of course, Sisley played at Heritage Hills High School for 3 years before going to Montverde. I think a lot of people were very high on him coming in to Bloomington. It's an exhibition against an NAIA team, but he dunked all over Marion, and I think that was kind of his welcome to Bloomington party. I had the call for that on Big Ten Plus back in October. And ultimately, Sisley did not have the freshman season that a lot of people were expecting. He was scoreless in 5 of the final 6 games to close the season. He didn't score in double figures after January 4th. He just generally wasn't very good in Big Ten play. And in hindsight, I think maybe a lot of people overreacted a little bit to Darren DeVries taking Trent Sisley out of the rotation because, I mean, let's be honest. This is a freshman playing Power 4 college basketball against guys who are much older, much more experienced, much more physically imposing than him. And that's just the nature of the beast when it comes to the transfer portal and guys getting extra years of eligibility. You're talking about an 18, 19-year-old dude playing against grown men. And I think Darren DeVries could have handled the Sisley situation better because there were a lot of situations late in games as far as blowouts were concerned, and Indiana had no shortage of those this year, where you were thinking, okay, well, the 5 on the floor aren't getting it done. Let's let the young guys get out there. And I was certainly on that train, and I do think that, for example, against Purdue, a game that Indiana lost by nearly 30 points, Sisley should have gotten more run than he ultimately did. But that was at Darren DeVries' discretion. He rode with the guys he had out there. It didn't work, but he stuck to the guys he had out there, and his rotations, as we know, were very short. So Sisley, ultimately, in his freshman season, did not have much of an impact. He averaged 4 points per game. He only shot 43% from the floor, and he shot 27% from 3. He struggled at the free throw line as well, just 54%. So ultimately, you would like to see more from Trent Sisley moving forward into year 2, but I do think it is a very big vote of confidence in his belief in head coach Darren DeVries that he decided to come back to Bloomington for his sophomore season. I think that he's going to be a big piece of this program in the years to come, and he's certainly somebody that the fans have taken a liking to, given that he is the lone scholarship player on the roster who is from the state of Indiana. Now, there was a devastating transfer departure in the form of Jason Drake transferring out of Bloomington. And this opens an interesting can of worms because Jason Drake, who transferred from Drexel and prior to that played at Cleveland State, did not play at all. He missed the entire season with what the program called a lower body injury. Never played. And we knew with him coming into the program that he was going to be sidelined to start the season. Darren DeVries was very clear about that coming in. But Jason Drake never stepped on the floor. He never played. And it was one of the weirder storylines to follow throughout the season because whenever Darren DeVries was asked about Jason Drake, the Drexel transfer for Indiana men's basketball, oh, yeah, he's progressing, he's getting there. But he never gave a firm timetable. And what I don't understand is, did DeVries and his staff just completely misinterpret the future outlook of this guy in Jason Drake? Or did they spend a scholarship on a guy who they knew was not likely to play at all in the 2025-26 season? Because if so, what are we doing? I guess that's what I want to know. Josh Harris had the exact same thing happen to him. Josh Harris was the transfer from North Florida who was added alongside Jason Drake. Both of them missed the entire season with lower body injuries. How does that happen? Scholarships are limited. Indiana had no depth. That was one of the things that did them in this season, was just a complete and utter lack of depth. Because you were basically running a 7 or 8 man rotation. And even then, the word rotation is very generous as far as Indiana men's basketball is concerned with head coach Darren DeVries. They had no depth at the 5 position. They could do nothing down low. Josh Harris, a 6'8" forward, probably could have, maybe added to that. But ultimately, he didn't play at all. So Darren DeVries was rocking with 2 forwards, one of whom, in Reed Bailey, was not really a forward at all in any way, shape, or form. Now, we have established that Reed Bailey ultimately did not pan out. The Davidson transfer just didn't fit in the Big Ten. And Darren DeVries realized, hey, you need bigs to play in the Big Ten. Yeah, most IU fans could have told you that. But what I want to know is, why did Darren DeVries spend 2 scholarships on Jason Drake and Josh Harris when both of them missed the entire season due to injury? I know in the past, Cliff Marshall, the old strength and conditioning coach for Indiana men's basketball, was criticized because, well, Indiana was notoriously bad at shooting free throws under Mike Woodson. They always looked like they were tired, especially late in the games. What did they do on the off days as far as workouts are concerned? This is a Cliff Marshall-esque story arc in the form of Jason Drake and Josh Harris coming in, taking up scholarship spots, and then taking up NIL money, presumably, because let's be honest, it is pay for play. Taking up NIL money, taking up scholarship spots, and sitting on the bench for the entire season. The whole campaign, 30-plus games, no semblance of life, no sign of life on the floor for Indiana men's basketball. Darren DeVries, I have a proposition for you. Do you want somebody to take a scholarship, to take NIL money, presumably, because let's be honest, it's Indiana. You're going to have to pay some guys to come here under a first-year head coach, even if it is Indiana University. Darren DeVries, do you want me to take a scholarship and take NIL money and sit on the bench? I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll go to grad school if it means that I can join Indiana men's basketball, get a scholarship for grad school to get my master's, maybe in sport management or something like that, and just ride the bench the whole game. I will be the best water boy that you have ever seen. I will be the Jason Tatum to your Bam Adebayo in the 2024 Paris Olympics. I will hand out all the waters to all the scholarship guys who actually know what the heck they're doing on the hardwood. I will be the Jason Drake or the Josh Harris of Indiana men's basketball next season if Darren DeVries just says the word. I think, as far as Jason Drake and Josh Harris go, you got a scholarship, fine. Pursue your education, that's great. You got NIL money. One of the stipulations of that NIL money is that you actually at least attempt to pay off the investment. It's one thing if a program spends a lot of money to bring a player in via NIL, transfer portal, which is what Indiana did with its entire roster, including Drake and Harris, and the player just doesn't produce. That happens. Sometimes guys just aren't the right fit. It's another thing if you spend money to bring these guys in and they just flat out do not play. I think that Jason Drake and Josh Harris should be, now, I wouldn't say forced, but should be encouraged or perhaps nudged slightly, kindly, to pay back their NIL money. I do. Because what's the point of spending all this money to bring in guys if they're not going to play? That is money for nothing. Thank you, Mark Knopfler. Thank you, Dire Straits. You get your money for nothing, and I will leave it at that because this is a sports show. But I cannot for the life of me understand what Darren DeVries saw in Jason Drake and Josh Harris. It was known very early on that they were injured. So why were they taking scholarship spots from guys who could have come in and at least added some depth to the bench, if nothing else? I mean, I'm not asking you to bring in 2 more Lamar Wilkersons. That would have been nice. But there's just no reason that both of these guys should have taken scholarships and taken NIL and missed the entire season. As far as next year is concerned, we have 3 games confirmed on the schedule in the non-conference slate for Indiana men's basketball in 2026-27, year 2 of the Darren DeVries era, where we know Trent Sisley is coming back, and outside of that, nothing. I don't know anything else. Nobody knows anything because everything is so hush-hush as far as college sports goes, and I've said this before, I would not sneeze at Josiah Miles leaving. I would not sneeze at Nick Dorn leaving. I think if Nick Dorn comes back, he's going to have a much different role. He is not a starter. We have established that he is not a starter. He started so many games with the absence of Tatum Conaway. He was good until teams figured out how to guard him, and once his scoring was taken away, it was curtains. He was done as far as his impact on the floor was concerned, either offensively or defensively. I think about the Purdue game. The Boilers were hunting him on defense. Josiah Miles was just a non-factor for Indiana. He just did not make an impression on me or anyone else in any conceivable way, shape, or form. I'd be okay with him leaving too. But we know that at least Indiana's going to have 1 player on the floor next year in the form of Trent Sisley. The 3 games that have been confirmed: home against Bellarmine, shout out to the Knights; Gainbridge Fieldhouse against Syracuse on a Monday night, of all things. On a Monday night. November 9th at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, Indiana versus Syracuse. That'll be Darren DeVries versus Jerry McNamara for the second consecutive year, because McNamara coached Siena to the NCAA tournament, and Siena nearly beat Duke. And that was really funny. Indiana faced Siena at Assembly Hall last year and beat them by about 20 points. So Indiana faces Syracuse at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I think it's objectively pretty funny that that's being referred to as a neutral site game because, I mean, just doing some mental math in my head, Gainbridge Fieldhouse is an hour from Bloomington, and it's at least 10 hours from Syracuse, if not more. That should not be billed as a neutral site game, but it is. It is because it's not at Assembly Hall and it's not at the Carrier Dome as it was once known in Syracuse. And the third and final confirmed non-conference game that Indiana has on its schedule for next season is Kentucky, which will take place at Lucas Oil Stadium 2 days after Christmas. That is on December 27th, 2026. So I think this kind of has a part to play in a larger problem that Indiana has had as far as men's basketball goes with respect to the atmospheres at Assembly Hall. You schedule a bunch of nobodies to play at Assembly Hall in the non-conference slate and then wonder why the fans don't care. Well, I mean, all due respect, former grade school classmate of mine, Billy Smith, spent some time at Bellarmine on its basketball program, on its basketball team, I should say, with the program, did Billy Smith. He spent some time there. All due respect to the Knights, Bellarmine is not exactly a program at a caliber that's going to put backsides in seats at Assembly Hall. But I understand buy games are a thing. What I don't like is that Indiana is playing what will probably be its two highest caliber non-conference opponents in Syracuse and Kentucky away from Bloomington. And I get it. I'm from Indianapolis. There are a ton of Indiana alumni, as you would expect, in the 317. But you've got to find a way to get these teams down to Assembly Hall. Or, I mean, obviously Indiana played in Lexington the same night as the Heisman Trophy ceremony, and that did not go very well. Go to Syracuse. Play on a home floor. Get some juice back in the non-conference schedule because Indiana this year, they didn't schedule anybody at Assembly Hall as far as the non-conference games are concerned. The one exception to that is Kansas State. Now, the Wildcats were ultimately not very good, and there's nothing Indiana can do about that. But, I mean, you look at the neutral site games. Marquette was at the United Center. Louisville was at Indianapolis. At some point, you got to put your foot down and say, hey, we want this game on campus. Could you imagine Indiana versus Kentucky at Assembly Hall? We all know what happened the last time that game took place. And unfortunately, Indiana won't let that go. The watch shot was great. It was a cool memory. It was a watershed moment in the rise of Indiana basketball under Tom Crean. But we need to let that go. We need to let that die. It was a regular season game. It was cool. It was a buzzer beater. Kentucky was number one. I get it. But man, it's been over 15 years now. Please let it go. Just let it go. I would love to have Kentucky come back to Bloomington, to have them play at Assembly Hall. Again, get Syracuse in here. Can you imagine how packed Press Row is going to be up in Section K? Syracuse would probably send their best student media members. Indiana would have their best student media members covering that game. But no, it's going to be at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. I just think there's got to be a way. There's got to be a way. It's great that Indiana's playing Syracuse and Jerry McNamara. It's great that they're playing Kentucky at Lucas Oil Stadium. But I really wish that those games would be in Bloomington. I think it would be better for everybody because it would put butts in seats and it would give fans a reason to care about a non-conference game in Bloomington, and it would give the students a reason to care before the calendar flips from December to January and Big Ten play really gets underway. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on 98.7 The Zone. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Easter Sunday. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. We are in the midst of Final Four weekend, and the women's Final Four has, for the second consecutive year, featured the same four teams. This is a very strange phenomenon that seems to only take place in the women's side of college basketball. The exact same four teams for 2 years in a row. Texas, UCLA, South Carolina, and UConn. There is very little parity in the world of women's college basketball. And as far as the women's Final Four is concerned, Indiana has a while until they get back to being in that kind of conversation. It wasn't that long ago that Indiana was giving a scare to Dawn Staley's South Carolina Gamecocks in the round, or excuse me, not the round of 16, goodness gracious, the Sweet 16, or in the round of 32. But it's so odd because you look at the women's bracket and you look at the way these games are decided, and it's not like this year's men's tournament has been, which, by the way, the men's tournament has been awesome. So many good games, no matter where you look. But you look at the women's bracket, it is ridiculously top-heavy, just blowout after blowout, games decided by 15 points or more. And one of those blowouts was in the first game of the women's Final Four between South Carolina and UConn. And South Carolina wins 62-48. UConn suffers its first and only loss of the season, 38-1. And Gino Auriemma got into it with Dawn Staley. Gino Auriemma has been a phenomenal head coach in UConn for a really long time, but you don't really see tempers flare like that very much on the women's side, unless you're looking at maybe Kim Mulkey and LSU. It's just very strange. Your team loses in the Final Four, you think you just shake the hand of the coach that beat you and say, hey, congratulations, hope you guys win or whatever, hey, good game, all the best moving forward. But no, Gino Auriemma got into it with Dawn Staley. And you look at what Teri Moren has done here in Bloomington as far as Indiana women's basketball is concerned. She is very well respected by coaches like Dawn Staley on the women's side. Indiana keeping 3 of its players around for next season. And these are 3 important, lack of departures, if you will, for lack of a better term, for Indiana women's basketball moving forward into next season, with the likes of Lene Beaumont, Maya Makaleski coming back. And that is a big duo for Indiana staying in Bloomington. Beaumont, obviously, she missed 2 years ago due to injury. Makaleski, a true freshman, came on as the season wore on. And Beaumont, this past season, averaged 13 points per game on 43% shooting, was going to be a big piece for Indiana throughout the campaign. And you know that she was excited to get back on the floor after missing the 2024-25 season due to injury. And she made an impact. And the question for Indiana women's basketball moving forward as they look to get back to the upper echelon of the Big Ten is, well, does Teri Moren still have it in her? I think the answer is yes. I think that Indiana, it was a combination of a flawed roster this year, a lack of depth, bad injury luck, and I think maybe just a little bit of a lack of production as far as Indiana women's basketball is concerned. I mean, you have somebody in Shea Chesky who became the second Division I women's player ever to average 50% from the floor, 40% from three, and 90% from deep on 20-plus points per game. And there was just not enough around her. There was not enough around Chesky, and it's a shame. Chesky participating in a three-point contest at Hinkle Fieldhouse earlier this week, the last time that she will wear the Indiana uniform. You would have liked to see Shea Chesky just get a little bit of help and see if she could get into the NCAA tournament, because ultimately she fell just short of that goal. And even still, her 2 seasons in Bloomington, very memorable because there are a few shooters in the country better than her. Well, with her graduation, Maya Makaleski and Lene Beaumont staying in Bloomington, I think that's big. I think that is really, really big for Indiana moving forward. I don't know what Indiana's roster is going to look like moving forward on the women's side. It's kind of like the men's side. These programs ended up in similar spots. They finished the season with comparable records, both in Big Ten play and overall. The women did a little bit worse in conference play. I think their non-conference schedule was a little bit softer than the men's, although that is difficult to do because the men wilted against pretty much every good team that they played in the non-con, but both teams finished the regular season 18-14, sub 500 in the league. And on the women's side, it's clear they didn't have enough depth. It's clear that especially in the paint, does this sound familiar? In the paint, they struggled. They struggled quite a bit with the likes of Xenia Sokaguman getting injured around December, and then Odessa Noyan, the Virginia transfer from Sweden, just not producing enough. I think that was the big key. That was a big bugaboo for Indiana women's basketball, because I think on one hand, Odessa Noyan was asked to do a little bit too much. She was always supposed to be a reserve forward, and she got thrust into a starting role just by virtue of Sokaguman being injured. And Noyan entering the transfer portal, she became the 5th Indiana women's basketball player to do it. This roster is depleted going into next season. Mentioned the likes of Makaleski and Beaumont coming back, but Noyan entering the portal earlier this week. Other impact players for Indiana, Phoenix Stotine and Jade Onjeneme. Both of them depth pieces. I would say Onjeneme more of a depth piece than Phoenix Stotine was. Stotine fell out of favor as the season wore on, and then was spotted on the Michigan State men's basketball fan section wearing Michigan State gear when the Spartans came to Bloomington a little bit, I'd say around a month ago. That was a whole nother discussion. But Indiana now has 5 women's players in the portal: Stotine, Faith Wiseman, Jadon Janeme, Chloe Spreen, and Odessa Noyan. Teri Morin has kind of had this issue for a little bit now as far as players transferring out. You think of past years for Indiana women's basketball, the departures, they were more, I would say, more impactful players. That's perhaps the best way to put it. Last year, Yarden Garzon, the sharpshooter from Israel, transferred to Maryland. Lexus Bargesser, who maybe was not the best fit as far as Big Ten caliber players goes, transferred to Colorado State. Those were 2 big losses for Indiana because Bargesser was pretty good on the defensive end, even if her offense left a little bit to be desired at times. But it's tricky. And you wonder, is it a money thing? Is it a coaching thing? Is it a locker room thing? And you never want to speculate as far as those things are concerned. But the roster turnover for Indiana women's basketball, part of the reason that they were so successful, say, for example, in my freshman and sophomore years under Teri Morin, was because they had that year-to-year continuity. You kept the nucleus together. You think of players like Chloe Moore McNeil, Grace Berger, Mackenzie Holmes, Sarah Scalia, who transferred over from Minnesota, spent a couple years in Bloomington, and was such a big piece for Indiana. I was honestly surprised to see her not get a shot in the WNBA. But you look at that kind of nucleus. Sydney Parrish playing a few years in Bloomington, coming home after starting her career in Oregon. Scalia, Moore McNeil, Parrish, Berger, Holmes, that nucleus of Indiana women's basketball was so important to their success. And you get that experience year over year in the NCAA tournament, and it builds on you. It builds for you. It molds you, I think, in a lot of ways. It teaches you what it takes to be successful in the Big Ten, which is loaded as far as women's college basketball is concerned. And then you take that into the postseason and you hope to make a run. And ultimately, those postseason runs didn't perhaps materialize the way that Holmes and Berger and the like were hoping that they would. But they at least got into the dance and they had a shot. And I think with this sort of iteration of Indiana women's basketball, that roster continuity year over year is not there. And I do think that could change coming into the near future because you've got some young players to build around with the likes of Nevaeh Caffey, Maya Makaleski. Lene Beaumont is sort of one of the leaders of the group. The question is who else is going to step up around them, and that's where I think it's so important for Teri Morin to hit the portal in a good way this offseason. It's one thing to add players from the portal. It's another thing to add the right players in the transfer portal. And that goes for the men's side. That goes for the men's side as well. I mean, we just saw for Northwestern, Trey Singleton entering the portal. He's a Jeffersonville, Indiana native, and he won the Class 4A state title over Fishers his senior year of high school. He was the leading scorer on that Jeffersonville team that upset Fishers because the Tigers were undefeated at the time. And I would not be surprised. I would hope that at least Trey Singleton gets a call from Darren DeVries. If he doesn't like the fit, if it doesn't work, that's fine. But I really think that Darren DeVries should give Trey Singleton a shot because he's certainly got the tools to be a very solid player in the Big Ten. And as far as Darren DeVries goes, I do think that bringing in younger guys is going to be what he has to do going into year 2. Trey Singleton transferring out of Northwestern after 1 year. He's an Indiana native. You think maybe he likes to stay in the Big Ten. His family is from not too far away. It seems like a no-brainer to at least give him a call. Give Trey Singleton a call because he's a freshman. He is somebody who you could build this program around, because one of the biggest question marks for Indiana is how are you going to rebuild a program when you brought in a bunch of fifth-year seniors and they are all now gone and your entire nucleus was one and done with the likes of Connor Enright, Tatum Conaway, Lamar Wilkerson, Tucker DeVries, etc. All these guys were one and done. So you're 1 year into a rebuild and you have nothing to show for it. If you want to ingratiate yourself a little bit more and get a little bit more patience with the fan base, if you're Darren DeVries for Indiana men's basketball, I think you've got to lean on younger guys. You've got to bring in, say, freshman transfers, sophomore transfers. They've got to be, though, power conference caliber players, and that's the hard part. That is the difficult part because, I mean, let's be honest. You bring in a guy like Connor Enright from DePaul, right? I mean, Connor Enright, he played hard, but at the end of the day, was he a Big Ten caliber starter? No, I would say no. I think Sam Alexis was a bench player caliber big, but he wasn't a starting center He wasn't. And Darren DeVries took an entire year to realize, wait, you need bigs in the Big Ten. Who knew? But hey, better late than never. I'd like to see DeVries give a guy like Trey Singleton a call, give some younger guys a call, build something. I know it's slow, but that's what you have to do in this age of college basketball. You've got to build something from the ground up. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday here on 98.7 The Zone. Nick Rotacap with you. Thanks so much for tuning in on this Easter Sunday, and happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. Hope you're enjoying the time with family and or friends, whoever you celebrate with. And if you celebrate by yourself, hey, that is cool as well. We've got a lot to talk about here in hour number 2, and we are going to start with the Las Vegas Raiders-sized elephant in the room. I don't know if that's a big elephant. I mean, as far as successful teams go as of late, maybe one of the smaller elephants, but looking to change that is Indiana quarterback and projected number 1 overall pick, Fernando Mendoza. Now, Mendoza had his pro day earlier this week here in Bloomington, and he impressed a lot of people. Shocker, Heisman Trophy winning, national champion, undefeated quarterback, can spin the rock. And he did it with all 32 NFL teams in attendance. And the Las Vegas Raiders, I like what they are setting Fernando Mendoza up to do. They are not putting the pressure on him to start in week 1 unprepared, regardless of the situation, setting him up to fail. They are not doing that. And I like it. I like it. On Thursday, it was announced that Kirk Cousins would be signing with the Raiders. And Cousins, a veteran in the National Football League, 37 years old, drafted all the way back in 2012, if you can believe that. He has passed for over 44,000 yards in his career. He's been around the block. He has been around the block for a very long time. Began his career with Washington, then he went to Minnesota, spent the last couple years in Atlanta, and the Falcons quarterback situation was really weird because they bring in Cousins, they draft Michael Penix in the top 10, and it was a very, very odd dynamic between the two of them. Why would you sign Kirk Cousins to a massive contract, over $100 million, and then draft a rookie in the top 10, the top 15, whatever it was, for the Falcons? Ultimately, Atlanta firing its head coach and its GM. Cousins was cast off, and Clint Kubiak, the soon-to-be first-year head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, says, hey, Kirk, come on down. We'll give you $20 million guaranteed. Whatever your agent said, it worked wonders on us. And you can come down to Las Vegas, and you can come play for us, and you can come mentor Fernando Mendoza. Clint Kubiak said at the league meeting earlier this week, the National Football League owners' meetings that take place before every season, well, you don't want to start Fernando Mendoza week 1. Ideally, day 1, Kubiak said. You love for him to be able to learn behind somebody. That's in a perfect world. And he said it doesn't work out that way, but Kubiak said that it can often help a player to have a mature adult to sit behind and watch how they run the show. And in this case, that mature adult is Kirk Cousins. I think that this is a good dynamic for Mendoza. And, you know, it took him some time to marinate when he was at Cal. You look at his numbers from his first season, his freshman season at Cal. I almost said his rookie season. He redshirted his first year on campus and then played a little bit as a redshirt freshman. He played 9 games, started in 8 of them. He wasn't great, but hey, he's a redshirt freshman starting in the Pac-12. Rest in peace to the Pac-12. But yes, Fernando Mendoza starting in that situation had his growing pains. And then in year 2, as a starter, he showed enough flashes and impressed Curt Cignetti, who, as we all know, has a great eye for talent. And Cignetti says, hey, come to Bloomington. We'll get your pocket presence fixed up. We'll get your decision-making fixed up. And we will turn you into, well, a Heisman Trophy winning national champion quarterback. Safe to say it worked out pretty well. I think that for Fernando Mendoza in Las Vegas, what you're looking at is potentially an Alex Smith, Patrick Mahomes dynamic like those two had in Kansas City nearly 10 years ago now, which is crazy to think about, that was almost 10 years ago that Patrick Mahomes was drafted by the Chiefs. But this could be the kind of situation where Kirk Cousins maybe, I don't know, takes some of the lumps in the first few weeks of the season, because even though, say, the Raiders brought in a guy like Tyler Linderbaum, who can be the centerpiece of their offensive line, they're probably still going to have some glaring weaknesses. I mean, you don't get the number 1 overall pick by accident. You cannot stumble into that situation. You have to be very bad. You have to be the worst team in the league. And the Raiders were. And it's probably not going to be smooth sailing for Cousins or Mendoza, whoever runs the offense, because yes, they've got Ashton Jeanty, they've got Brock Bowers, do the Raiders. Their receiving core is a little iffy. It is a little iffy. And I do think that having Cousins to sit behind, if you're Fernando Mendoza, having a guy like him to just watch run the offense, show you what it's like to be the leader of an NFL franchise, I think that's big. I think that is very big. And we know, based on what Curt Cignetti has said about Fernando Mendoza, he prepares like nobody I've ever seen. That's Curt Cignetti's words, not mine. Mendoza prepares relentlessly. He talked about it during his pro day, which, by the way, I think he aced. Mendoza talked about how he is so process-oriented. And there's this trickle-down effect as far as Curt Cignetti is concerned with the way he runs his program. And you can see it permeate through the players and everything that they say and everything that they do and the way they conduct themselves. And as far as Mendoza goes, he has really leaned on the process-oriented mindset of Curt Cignetti, talking about, hey, if you put in the correct preparation throughout the week with respect to film study, taking care of your body, putting in good reps in practice, and being efficient about it, you will go into games confident and have a higher chance of success. And then in turn, when that preparation translates to success, you become more confident in the process. And it's a cycle. It's a snowball effect, but it's the good kind. And while I don't think that Fernando Mendoza, the Indiana quarterback, is maybe the highest ceiling prospect that we've ever seen, let's be honest. He's got legs, but he doesn't have legs like Lamar Jackson. That's okay. Not very many quarterbacks do. That's why Lamar Jackson is such an electrifying player. It's a shame that he's probably never going to win a Super Bowl. It's a shame the Ravens didn't get Max Crosby, but I do think that also helps out Fernando Mendoza. And sure, Mendoza doesn't have that kind of ceiling, but he's got the work ethic and he's got a high enough floor that I think he can mold himself into a successful franchise quarterback for the Las Vegas Raiders. I saw somebody who said this on Twitter. This isn't my original joke, but I think that it's very funny. Cousins and Mendoza, their personalities together, you put them in Las Vegas, it's going to look like a mission trip. It's so ironic, the juxtaposition of those two guys in a city like Las Vegas where gambling runs rampant and, the saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. I will say, I spent some time in Las Vegas before I turned 21, and I'm not a big gambler anyway. I mean, I'll go to the upstairs pub and have a drink every now and again. I'm not a big gambler. Vegas was very underwhelming to me. I think Victor Wembanyama had a really good statement about Las Vegas. He said something to the tune of everything feels really fake and hollow. And well, Victor, I didn't go to the Strip. Wemby, I don't know, maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He's such an alien physical specimen that he probably doesn't want to go out in public very much because he's very easily recognizable. But Wemby, I think you had a point when you said that Vegas was hollow and fake and not enjoyable. I agree with you. Now, I was there on a bowling trip. I didn't bowl very well. Maybe that has something to do with it. But Mendoza and Kirk Cousins in Las Vegas, that's as close to a mission trip as you're going to get for a pair of NFL quarterbacks. And I think Klint Kubiak has a really good blueprint for those two. He's got a plan. And you don't always see that with franchises that stumble into a top draft pick. They're kind of sometimes just hoping that a guy comes in and you draft him and he's the Band-Aid to fix the proverbial bullet hole. And usually that doesn't work. Usually that fails because you need more than one guy to fix your problems. And I do think that as far as Klint Kubiak goes, bringing in a guy that he's coached before in the form of Kirk Cousins and letting Mendoza learn from him, letting him learn the system with less pressure on his shoulders is going to be good for the long term. Because unfortunately, those of you here in Central Indiana who are Colts fans, very unfortunate the situation that we are in, you look at the way the Colts handled Anthony Richardson. Chris Ballard spends a top 5 pick on him. You're thinking, okay, this guy's got all the tools in the world. He is physically gifted beyond measure. He's got a howitzer for an arm. He's got legs like crazy. He's got all the potential. But there wasn't a good enough system around him. There was not good leadership. There was not a good vision. Richardson tapping out of a game didn't help either. But the Colts were so unsure of how they wanted to handle Anthony Richardson. And I think ultimately that really hurt them. That hurt Richardson's long-term prospects as an NFL quarterback. That hurt the Colts as an organization. And you're looking at a guy in Anthony Richardson whose confidence is probably gone, and I don't blame him. He's still super young, and I hope he balls out, but it's not going to be in Indianapolis. I don't see that happening to Fernando Mendoza in Indianapolis. I wish, in Las Vegas. I don't think that's happening to him. I also think that he's going to do himself a ton of favors with the way that he treats people. I mean, you look at his pro day, the way he ran things. One, just his gravitas alone was enough to get NFL Network to bring a crew and do live hits, live coverage of pro day inside Mellencamp Pavilion, a place where if you were in there prior to the renovation, about this time a year ago, if you were in there prior to that, you know, those buzzing lights, the terrible turf, it was stuck in the 90s. And sure, there are still parts of it that are stuck in the 90s. But for Fernando Mendoza to have the gravity that he does as the Heisman winning quarterback, to take advantage of the spotlight that he has, and to put that spotlight on his teammates, saying, hey, I have a ton of really talented players around me without whom I would not be in this position. Come take a look at them too. It wasn't just D'Angelo Pons running a sub 4.3 second 40-yard dash. It was all of the receivers that Mendoza helped put on display with his throwing program. He made sure that all 32 NFL teams that were in attendance in person in Bloomington, he made sure that they all knew, hey, these guys know the route tree. Look at how I work with them. Look at what they can do for your franchise. Everybody knows Omar Cooper is a highly touted prospect. He could go in the first round. Elijah Surratt, probably a mid-round pick. I'd love for the Raiders to get him. I would love that. That would be great. That would be great if Mendoza can have a former teammate of his in Las Vegas with him. In a perfect world, that's going to happen. Now, the NFL world is far from perfect, but that would be really cool. Showing off, obviously, the likes of Surratt and Cooper, but E.J. Williams, I thought, that deep ball from Mendoza down the seam, 60-plus yards in the air, dropped it right in the bucket. Williams ran right under it. That kind of chemistry allows these guys to shine. Mendoza showing off Williams, and then you've got Holden Stays running routes out there, Riley Nowakowski. Nowakowski is going to be a great pickup. He is going to be a really, really good pickup for a team. You'll probably see him go in the latter rounds, probably on day 3, I would assume. But Riley Nowakowski, his career arc, he began as a walk-on fullback at Wisconsin, and he couldn't get much playing time, which is crazy. Under Luke Fickell, he could not really even sniff the field. But Nowakowski shined for Indiana in 2025. He was kind of a do-it-all. He was a do-it-all kind of guy. He wasn't going to put up eye-popping receiving numbers. He wasn't going to, get the ball in the run game very much. What Nowakowski could do, what Riley Nowakowski could do, was a little bit of everything. He blocks his tail off, for starters. He can surprise you with his speed at times, and I don't think there was a bigger play that Riley Nowakowski made this season than the catch that he had on the final drive in Indiana's win over Penn State. It was the longest target of his career, and he made the catch 25 yards or so down the field like it was nothing. Like it was nothing. He can do it all. A lot of what he does doesn't show up on the stat sheet, but I think that Riley Nowakowski is going to make an NFL team very happy. You could see him sort of in a fullback type role, because he was described by NFL Network as sort of being in between as far as his size. He's 6'1", he's 250 pounds. But Fernando Mendoza said, hey, yeah, I know this is my pro day. Hey, Riley, go out there and catch some passes. That is the kind of guy that you want leading your NFL franchise if you're Clint Kubiak. And Mendoza is just, people talk about him as maybe being a little bit annoying, a little bit corny. But I think that for Fernando, his personality is such a plus, because in this day and age of athletes being so concerned with their branding and their public image, Mendoza says all the right things, but you can tell it's genuine, because before the national spotlight was on him, before the season even began, after week 1 against Old Dominion, it's very early doors. You know that he's got a lot of improvement to make, and this guy is the exact same in these press conferences as he was then. He is the exact same guy. I remember week 1 against Old Dominion, Mendoza didn't have a great game. Shocker. Week 1, transfer quarterback, entirely new system, entirely new offense, new teammates, didn't play well. He acknowledged it. He said, hey, I need to play better, and I'm going to play better. And he did. And he was so genuine. He was so honest, and you can tell he is just so fixated on success and helping his team win. You can't measure that. You can't measure that. I really think that Fernando Mendoza is going to be a franchise cornerstone with the Las Vegas Raiders for a very long time. And I also think that he helped his teammates improve their draft stock as well with his pro day, which, again, he didn't have to do. NFL Network made that a point. They made that very clear. And these guys know football better than I do, let's be honest. NFL Network talking about Fernando Mendoza at his pro day, saying, hey, he doesn't need to do this. Everything that you need to see from him is on tape. Everything you need to see from Fernando Mendoza is on the film. 16 games, 16 wins. You want it, it's there. But he's doing this because he wants to. Because he wants to help his teammates. You don't see that kind of selflessness very often in the world of college athletics anymore. And I think it's very refreshing to see. And I know, I think if there was ever a case to retire a number, I think Fernando Mendoza's number 15 should probably be at the front of that line. I know ultimately Indiana decided not to retire Mendoza's number as it's gone back into the hands of Tyler Cherry, the former Center Grove High School quarterback out of Greenwood, who medically redshirted last year due to an injury. He is now back wearing number 15, as is Nico Radicic at kicker, of course. Man, Tyler Cherry's got some big shoes to fill if he does step on the field, knowing that Fernando Mendoza wore his number before him. But it's so exciting. It is so exciting. Indiana football in 2026. I know if Fernando Mendoza ever gets a chance to come back, I don't know if the bye weeks line up as far as the Raiders go with Indiana football, but you know the moment he comes back, he's getting the loudest standing ovation ever. And it is such an exciting time to be an IU football fan. The ticket prices reflect that. But I'll tell you what, that stadium, you're not going to have any trouble filling it out for the foreseeable future. Number 15 is a big reason why. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rotocap with you here on 98.7 The Zone. I've got a question to pose, and my question to you is, have you ever seen not one, but two players transfer out of a program after not playing a single game? Let me rephrase. Have you ever seen two players transfer into a program while being injured, not play for the entire season, collect NIL money, and then transfer out? That's a real question. Your answer is probably no. You may have seen it happen with one player, but I doubt you've seen it happen with two. Well, we already know that Jason Drake is transferring out from Bloomington, and if you don't know who Jason Drake is, I don't blame you. I don't blame you. He hit the transfer portal for Indiana men's basketball. The first departure, not among those who are graduating. Jason Drake was injured at some point in the summer. And I didn't mention that in the first hour. But Jason Drake did work out with the team. He got hurt in the summer, and he didn't play. He did not play at all. Ultimately, he transferred into Bloomington and didn't play. My question is, if that happens to a player, obviously they're on scholarship. I get that. But if an injury happens to a player and ultimately they do not play at all, should they pay back their NIL money? Because, yeah, I understand. Summer workouts are hard. He went overseas, I am sure. He went to Puerto Rico. The team played 3 games down there. But he didn't play in any games that mattered, which is the whole point of NIL money, right, is giving it to guys so that they can play in games that matter. If he did not play in any games that mattered, then should he keep his NIL money? I don't know. That's a genuine question. Because, in most sports, obviously college sports is the Wild West, and we've heard that term thrown around because it's true. In most sports, you've got to play to get your money. You've got to hold up your end of the contract in some form or function. And MLB is kind of an exception to that rule. Major League Baseball, you got guys like Chris Bryant who have been struck with debilitating injuries and have played a very small portion of the games that they could play on massive contracts. But as far as NIL goes, are you going to see donors get frustrated if they donate, say, to Indiana men's basketball, and Indiana men's basketball uses that money to bring in players who get injured and then don't play and then leave? I think that is an interesting can of worms to consider. Indiana has had 2 players fall into this category of transferring in and then missing the entire season due to injury. The other is Josh Harris. And Harris just suffered a lower body injury in the fall, similar to Jason Drake. Now, Harris's injury was reported initially as a foot injury. He was spotted in a boot. There were multiple guys in a boot earlier in the season, Harris among them. Just these guys, they come in, injuries, bad luck. Harris, to his credit, it's not been announced if he's transferring out. I would hope he's staying, but it just stinks for Indiana men's basketball because you had two guys taking up scholarship spots on a team that was super thin, and they never saw the floor. They just never saw the floor. And thankfully, I mean, at least some sort of solace for Indiana men's basketball here is that Drake and Harris can both redshirt. I would assume Jason Drake would then be a redshirt junior, Josh Harris a redshirt sophomore, but Drake transferring out, so he's not coming back. He would be a redshirt junior, I should say. Josh Harris, a redshirt sophomore, can still come back and be a multi-year contributor to this program. That's something that Darren DeVries is going to have to look at very strongly going into year 2, is not just bringing in these hired guns. That was one of the frustrations for Indiana men's basketball fans, was that, okay, well, Coach DeVries bringing in a bunch of his guys, a bunch of older guys, but there's nobody left to carry on a supposed standard that should have been set. I don't know if it was, because if the standard is going 18-14 and finishing under 500 in Big Ten play, well, Indiana had a coach that did that. His name was Mike Woodson. But getting this program back to the promised land, it's going to take more than that. And the frustration with Darren DeVries was the fact that, okay, he poured all this money into firing Mike Woodson, getting rid of his staff, bringing in DeVries and his staff, bringing in a bunch of new players, and you are right back where you started at this time last year. You have a slightly above 500 pedestrian team on the wrong side of the bubble with no roster direction moving forward. And the only guy coming back that we know of for sure is Trent Sisley. That really surprised me. That was a shocker. Given the way that Darren DeVries spoke about and the way that he utilized Sisley throughout the season, I was kind of surprised when it was announced by On3 earlier this week that Sisley was coming back. I kind of thought there was a chance he would transfer. I know he's from Indiana, grew up an Indiana fan, diehard, right? Wanted to wear the cream and crimson from a very early age. Many such cases, by the way. I thought that he was going to leave. I thought that he was going to test greener pastures, because even as it was clear that Indiana's starting five and that Indiana's very thin rotation could not hold its own in the Big Ten, Sisley was just nowhere to be found. He was a ghost, relatively speaking. And I know he only scored in double figures once after the calendar flipped to January. He had very limited minutes in which to do so. And ultimately, his scoring numbers, under 5 points per game, relatively inefficient, under 30% from 3, under 45% from 2 as a forward, and only 55% at the free throw line. Not great numbers. But my argument is, well, Sisley should have been given some sort of run, especially later on in these blowout games where it's obvious that the five on the floor aren't getting it done. And the fact that Darren DeVries was very wishy-washy about explaining why Sisley didn't play, more often than not just giving non-answers, kind of pointed to him maybe wanting to go a different direction. So that's why I'm surprised that Sisley is coming back, because it just didn't seem like he was anything more than an afterthought for Darren DeVries in the back half of Indiana's season. That said, I'm happy to have him back, because you're hoping that he is somebody that DeVries can build on moving forward. Some sort of continuity year over year. We talked about it a little bit in the first hour. What was one of the big keys to Indiana women's basketball success? This is a little bit apples to oranges, but it was the year-over-year consistency of the core players like Grace Berger, Mackenzie Holmes, Sarah Scalia. And you think of Yarden Garzone even, because she was an impact player as a freshman. But these players, they stay. Sydney Parrish as well was a multi-year player. And those players stay, and while some faces come and go, the nucleus remains largely the same. And that was one of the reasons that Indiana women's basketball was so successful in the first half of this decade. Terry Morton elevating that program to new heights. It's because you have some semblance of connectivity year over year. And I think that's also why a lot of fans are maybe a little bit just jaded, burnt out, pessimistic about Indiana men's basketball moving forward, is because, well, there are a bunch of guys who are graduating, and there's only one that we know of on scholarship who's coming back. Now, there are a bunch of guys that we don't know of, guys like Alexa Ristic, a 6'3 freshman from Serbia, Andre Achimovic from Bosnia. Both of those guys barely played, if at all. They were both freshmen. They never saw the floor. Effectively, just for all intents and purposes, call it a redshirt year, I guess. I don't know. And then, Josh Harris, we don't know if he's coming back. He didn't play. He was injured in the fall. Unlucky. But these guys presumably were given NIL money to come to Indiana. My question is, since they didn't play at all, where does that money go? Is it just money for nothing? If it is, that kind of stinks. It's a one-sided investment. But I guess that's the reality in college sports these days. Now, Nick Dorn could come back for Indiana men's basketball. I've said this before. I don't know how I'd feel. I think if he does come back, he's got to have a different role. He's got to have a different role. Nick Dorn cannot be a starter for Indiana men's basketball in year 2 of Darren DeVries. It just can't happen because he's not a starting caliber player. Once teams figured out how to guard him and take away his three-point shot, he was a non-factor. And that is putting it politely for Nick Dorn. He had that crazy run at the end of January, and that was pretty much it. And to his credit, he made the best of an opportunity with Tatum Conaway getting hurt. But you look at his output in the final 7 games of the season, he only scored above 8 points one time. One time. Held scoreless against Wisconsin, scoreless against Purdue on the road, 1 point against Illinois, etc., etc. That's not a starting caliber player. You need some sort of consistency, and he just didn't show it. I'd like to see, and I said this in the first hour, I'd like to see Darren DeVries give a guy like Trey Singleton a call. Singleton transferring out of Northwestern. I think that he could be a good fit for Indiana men's basketball. If nothing else, look at what Matt Painter has done with Purdue. I know the Boilers got bounced. I know that ultimately Braden Smith and that nucleus came short of their ultimate goal of a national championship. But what did Matt Painter do to get Purdue to that upper echelon of the Big Ten on a relatively consistent basis? He recruited guys from the state of Indiana. You look at that nucleus: Braden Smith, Trey Coffin-Wren, Fletcher Lawyer. I know IU fans are excited that they never have to watch them play again. That's great. I'm with you. But let's be honest, they were successful. They were. Singleton from the state of Indiana. Where does Matt Painter successfully recruit? The state of Indiana. Singleton, a 6'8" forward out of Jeffersonville, Indiana, a Class 4A state champion at Jeffersonville High School. He started 31 games, played 25 minutes a game for Northwestern under head coach Chris Collins. He was pretty productive, averaged 7.5 points at 4.8 rebounds a game. For a freshman, yeah, you'll take that. You will take that from a freshman. That shows potential. And hey, if it's a good fit, I would love to see Trey Singleton in Bloomington. You like guys that have some sort of pride in their home state, have some sort of pride in representing the name on the front of their jersey. Indiana doesn't have names on the back of the jersey for a reason. And I think over the last couple of years in Bloomington, you've seen guys playing as if they had their name on the back of their jersey, playing to collect a check, not caring about the end result of the game, resigning themselves if things get tough, and then just moving on, and not really showing anything besides apathy. That's by and large. That's me generalizing a little bit, for sure. I'm generalizing. But I think that's why you see guys like Connor Enright. I mean, look, Enright, was he a Big Ten caliber player? I can't answer that definitively. But one of the things about Connor Enright that I think endeared him to the fans, even though his volume numbers on a production standpoint weren't there, was the fact that he played hard. He played really hard. He put his body on the line. He was diving for loose balls. Why do you think Purdue fans love Braden Smith so much? It's not just because he is, by assists in his career, the best point guard of all time. It's because against Northwestern in the Big Ten tournament, he freaking dove into a piece of cardboard on the sideline just to keep a ball from going out of bounds. Playing for something bigger than yourself. And I think if you, as head coach Darren DeVries for Indiana men's basketball, if you recruit guys from the state of Indiana who take pride in representing this state where basketball is such a huge part of the culture, I think you're going to see that pay off on the other end. Bringing in a bunch of hired guns, a bunch of mercenaries who care more about saying that they made it to the Big Ten than they care about the product of their labor as far as representing their institution, representing and putting on for the fan base who devotes so much of their time, money, and energy to caring about them. I think if you bring in guys who care more about the bigger picture, who care about something bigger than themselves, you're going to see that pay off with the fan base. I really do. And it kind of stinks that we've gotten to this point in college basketball, especially as far as Indiana goes, where you think money is going to solve your problems. You bring in the highest touted transfer recruits. That happened under Mike Woodson. It didn't work. It did not work at all. In Darren DeVries' case, Lamar Wilkerson was a great addition. He was. Now, was he the best against good teams? No, not really. And that is one question that I think on the NBA projection side of things, Wilkerson is going to have, is his output against good teams. Sure, he had 29 points against Michigan State. He had 20 against Purdue. How many of those were meaningful? I couldn't tell you. Just based on the eye test, it wasn't a lot. I know against Illinois on the road, he did nothing in the first half. Wilkerson was a good get for Indiana, if nothing else, because he was fun to watch. And you could tell that he was playing for something bigger than himself. Is it a coincidence that he had a very rocky upbringing and he was playing for his family? I mean, he bought his mom a new car after senior day. You don't see that much anymore in the world of college athletics, and it stinks. It stinks, but I know Indiana fans would love to see guys who are playing for the name on the front of their jersey. I think that's what you want at the end of the day. You want players to be emotional when things don't go their way because it means that they care. And I don't think that we've seen as much of that with Indiana men's basketball as the fans would like, and I think that's the key. I don't know what it's going to take for the long-term buy-in of IU basketball to be back to where it used to be. Obviously, it's not there right now. But I would really love to see this basketball program back to the way it used to be. Because, again, as a student at IU, I saw, just off the top of my head, I saw one NCAA tournament win. One. I'm a senior. The one win that happened was my freshman year when Indiana beat Kent State in the first round. That was it. That was the only NCAA tournament game that Indiana won. That should not be the norm. That should not be the standard. But because that has become the status quo over the last, for the better part of a decade, I mean, shoot, obviously under Archie Miller, Indiana didn't make the NCAA tournament. So just winning a game was actually above what the status quo has been. You've got to elevate the program back to the way it used to be. And for Darren DeVries, that cannot be done if you're just bringing in mercenaries and hired guns. You've got to have some sort of long-term plan for this program. Now, next year, you look ahead to Indiana men's basketball's schedule. 3 games confirmed on the non-conference side of things. The 2 that I'm keeping an eye on, obviously, are the ones against power conference teams. Unfortunately, they're both at neutral sites. And that is rather disappointing. Because one of the ways that you get the fans to care is you put butts in seats early in the season. You give them meaningful games to care about. Syracuse at Gainbridge Fieldhouse just announced on November 9th. That is a Monday night, which I'm assuming is because it overlaps with the Pacers season, and that was the one night that the arena was available. They're calling it, and by they I mean me, they're calling it the Super Bowl of student media. Syracuse versus Indiana at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. The fact that that goes in the books as a neutral site game I think is really funny. I said this in the first hour. Obviously, there are going to be more Indiana fans there than Syracuse fans. Selfishly, do I wish it was on a weekend? Yes. Because it's on a Monday night in November, I don't think there's going to be a capacity crowd at Gainbridge Fieldhouse. By the way, amazing place to watch a game. Amazing. I watched Tyrese Halliburton put up a triple-double in the NBA playoffs there last year. I was sitting in the nosebleeds. I didn't care. It was awesome. But I don't think that that's going to be a rockin' atmosphere. Kentucky at Lucas Oil Stadium 2 days after Christmas. That game's been a known commodity for a while, as sort of a home and home, if you will. Kentucky doesn't come back to Assembly Hall until 2028. Thank you, John Calipari, for being too much of a wuss to actually schedule Indiana when you knew that you were going to be leading the Wildcats. Now it's up to Mark Pope. Lucas Oil Stadium. The last time Indiana in any sport played a neutral site game there, it was Indiana against Louisville in football in 2023. There were more Louisville fans there than Indiana fans. It was embarrassing. It was embarrassing. I do think there could be a scenario where Big Blue Nation outnumbers Indiana at Lucas Oil Stadium in that game. I do. It's around the holidays. People are going to want to travel. They're going to want to travel. And I hope that Darren DeVries has some sort of long-term plan for this Indiana roster to restore the fan buy-in, get butts back in seats, because there's no excuse for the balcony at Assembly Hall to be empty for multiple Big Ten games. You could blame the students if you want. Blame the students if you want. I understand the student section has been a problem. As a media member, I can't fix that problem. I can't attend games as a fan, and I don't buy the tickets anyway. I wouldn't want to. But on the other side, the non-student part of the balcony was also empty repeatedly throughout this season. Schedule better non-conference opponents at Assembly Hall. That's a good way to get people to care. You win a couple games, people start to buy in. Just look what happened with Indiana football. Their first couple games were against nobodies in 2024. Then they won meaningful games, and the rest is history. Apples to oranges, I know, but there's got to be some sort of long-term vision for Darren DeVries. And hey, well, right now we know that one guy will be on the floor next year, and his name is Trent Sisley. Outside of that, I have no idea. Ryan Carr, the new general manager, has his hands full to the max, and it's a position that I do not envy. But hopefully, sometime sooner rather than later, Indiana men's basketball can cement its status once again as a perennial power in college basketball. In the meantime, though, Curt Cignetti's Indiana football is not a bad substitute. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday on 98.7 The Zone. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. Thanks so much for joining us on this Easter Sunday. Happy Easter to those of you who celebrate. April means it is time for the meat and potatoes of the season. In the diamond sports, college baseball and softball have been in full swing now for a little bit. I understand if your attention has been in other places given March Madness, but with that wrapping up here tomorrow night with the national championship just an hour up the road from here in Bloomington, we can turn our focus soon to the diamond sports. And one I want to turn your eyes to here is IU softball, approaching 30 wins in less than 40 games to start this season. It's about a 60-game campaign, so if you could win 40, that's a pretty solid measure of success. Well, Indiana softball here in April, beginning the month out west against UCLA, this coming weekend, April 10th through the 12th, taking on Purdue in Bloomington. Now, as a wise man named Curt Cignetti once said, Purdue sucks. And I think I speak for all IU fans when I say we don't like the folks in West Lafayette very much. We don't. And I know that whenever IU faces Purdue in any sport, the turnout is always good, which is what it should be. And IU softball and Purdue softball both having very good seasons so far. Purdue built some momentum last season on the softball side. And as somebody who broadcasts the home games for IU softball, I am obligated, not really, but I like to talk about IU softball because they're a fun team. They hit the ball around the yard like crazy. They do. They are one of the nation's best offenses, top 10 in batting average, slug, stolen bases, you name it. They're near the top. They are a really fun team to watch when they are clicking, which admittedly is not all the time, but you show me a team that is consistent every day and every day out in the world of baseball or softball, and I will show you a fake make-believe team because the fact of the matter is that does not exist. Indiana softball, relatively speaking, pretty consistent day after day as far as the offensive output is concerned. Obviously, you'll have games where you get shut down, but that's how it goes. Next weekend, they'll take on Purdue in Bloomington. Purdue is on course to win over 30 games this season to finish well above 500. They started the Big Ten slate near the top. Ultimately, they've kind of come back down to earth since then. But I really think this could be a very competitive and fun series at Anymore Field. Mid-April, the weather is kind of a toss-up. It always is in Bloomington. Right now, we're trending towards high 60s, low 70s. Rivalry series. Two teams that should be in the NCAA tournament come the middle of May. It's just going to be fun. It is going to be fun. I mean, this is a stretch where IU softball, coming back from the West Coast, is going to play a ton of games at home. A ton of games at home. You're talking about one against Butler, 3 against Purdue, 1 against Notre Dame. You think back a couple of years, Indiana won that game against Notre Dame on a walk-off grand slam from then freshman Alex Cooper. It's electric, man. It can be fun. I implore you, if you have not been to Andy Moore Field, come to a softball game. If you can't show up, that's fine. I've got the call either on IU Radio, on Big Ten Plus, depending on the day. Tune in. It's a fun time. It is a very fun time. IU and Purdue always seem to play each other close. It doesn't matter the sport. It doesn't matter how the team's seasons are going, unless it's football, in which case Curt Cignetti is going to kick your behind to the curb and leave no prisoners. Whether your name is Ryan Walters or Barry Odom, it does not matter. It does not matter. That's kind of the one exception to the rule. But IU and Purdue, always a good rivalry, doesn't matter the sport. I don't expect softball to be any different this year. As far as baseball is concerned, the less said about them, the better, I guess. Just not something I want to spend a ton of time on anymore. Not something I want to spend a ton of energy on. If I'm a fan, not something I want to spend a ton of money on. Not that it's really possible to spend a ton of money on baseball because tickets are only $10. I think that is too expensive because I think you would have to pay me $10 to watch an IU baseball game. They are extremely inconsistent, extremely volatile. The pitching, streaky at best, putrid at worst. Hit by pitch after hit by pitch, walks, wild pitches, free bases, errors, bad defense, you name it, they've got it. They've got it. I mean, this is a team now at the halfway point through the season, well under 500. Well under 500. The way the Big Ten has structured the conference tournament, you need to finish in the top 4 of the regular season standings if you want to even consider having enough pitching to make a run and win the whole thing. With the addition of the West Coast teams, the Big Ten in baseball has gotten better, has gotten deeper, just by virtue of adding better programs. But the Big Ten in baseball is still, by and large, looked upon relatively unfavorably, I would say, as far as college baseball conferences go. I've said this before, I don't think the Big Ten is a power conference in baseball. I think that the Sun Belt is more of a power conference than the Big Ten is in baseball. Because usually, the Big Ten does not have a lot of teams that are going to get at-large bids to the NCAA men's baseball tournament and ultimately have a shot at making the College World Series. That's just not how it works. It's just not. The Big Ten is usually pretty weak. You talk to college baseball players in other conferences around the country, they'll tell you the same thing. They sometimes will scoff at the Big Ten because it's just not very good. And Indiana baseball, with the talent that it has, should be more competitive in the Big Ten than it is. Jeff Mercer at the helm, I don't know if he's the guy. He's a great person, don't get me wrong. I've had plenty of conversations with him over the years. I don't know if he's the right guy to lead this program moving forward. Because the undisciplined, the mental boneheaded mistakes, the repeated blowout losses where games just seem to spiral on them, it happens too many times to be considered, it was just a bad night. Sometimes you just get baseballed, right? Sometimes you just get baseballed. No, that only works so many times. That's the problem. It only works so many times before you have to start asking questions about who is at the controls. I mean, you look at, obviously, midweek games are weird at times. You can't put a whole lot of stock into them, but this is a script that we've seen so many times with Indiana baseball that it gets kind of concerning. You get up early, for example, Indiana at Evansville earlier this week, up 4-0 after 4. You give up one in the 5th. Your offense goes quiet, 4-1 going into the 7th, and then you give up a 3 spot and it's tied. Your offense is continually dead in the water, held scoreless ultimately for the final 7 innings, getting walked off in the 11th inning by a guy who's hitting under 200 on the season in Tate Deal. I couldn't even tell you who Tate Deal was if it wasn't for the fact that he walked off Indiana baseball because he hits under 200 on the season, but he finds a way after Indiana goes up 4-0 after 4 against the Evansville Purple Aces. Evansville ties it at 4 in the 7th. I get it. It's a midweek. Pitching is at a premium. But the offense just going completely dead silent against an Evansville team that entered the game 11 games under 500. Those kinds of losses happen so frequently for Indiana baseball that they're just kind of maddening. They are just maddening. You look at the talent that's on this roster. You look at year in and year out with Indiana baseball. The consistent sentiment among the national media, man, Indiana can make some noise in the Big Ten. Man, they've got some really talented guys. They've got some studs on this roster. Jeff Mercer has sent so many guys to the Major League Baseball draft in the top 10 rounds. They're going to put it together. They could win the Big Ten. They should make the NCAA tournament. No. Best I can do is 7 games under 500 at the halfway point of the season. The inconsistency is just so annoying. And now you're at a spot, if you're Indiana baseball, where you need to start sweeping teams week after week. Dropping midweeks really isn't an option anymore. It just isn't. You've got about a month and a half left in the season. Reasonably speaking, you cannot drop many more midweeks, and you certainly can't drop many more conference series. You're just running out of time. Indiana and Northwestern are going to play at Wrigley Field here in about a month. I am sorry to any Chicago area IU alumni who watch that game, because what IU puts on that field will probably be an affront to the game of baseball. No disrespect to Jeff Mercer. All the players work their tails off. I just don't know that Jeff Mercer is the guy going forward. Northwestern, usually not a very formidable Big Ten baseball program. But man, playing at Wrigley Field, it's a shame that they have to face Indiana. It is a shame because Indiana is such an inconsistent program. And I've seen them play. When they're on, they're good. But when they're off, what they play is a disservice to the great game of baseball. That's going to do it here on IU Sports Sunday. Thanks so much for tuning in here on 98.7 The Zone. I've been Nick Rotacap. Hope you have a fantastic Easter Sunday with your family or friends or whoever you celebrate with. Enjoy the rest of your Easter Sunday.